Hi, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Dave with the IB English guys. Today we want to talk about some of the changes to the paper 2 criteria. And specifically, we want to hone in on criterion B1.
That's right, Mr. Giles. Criterion B1 is all about the analysis of authorial choices, and that's what we need to explore today.
That's right. Let's first talk about the criterion, and it reads analysis and evaluation of textual features and or broad authorial choices.
Okay, so we're thinking about those textual features and broad authorial choices. We need to be able to identify those, and we need to be able to label those as well. We have a guiding question that can kind of serve as a descriptor to break this down even further. And the question reads, to what extent does the candidate analyze and evaluate how meaning is shaped by the choices of language, techniques, and style and or broader authorial choices?
Okay, it gives a little more specific ideas about to what extent, and we're thinking about analyzing and evaluating when we're talking about these features. And again, this is 5 points on a 25-point rubric. With now some advice we have to examiners and to students and teachers is to identify and label those precise authorial choices in the literary work when we're discussing paper 2 works.
Yeah, then you want to think about also what is the effect of these authorial choices? How do they shape meaning? So it's not just identifying the feature by itself. You have to think about what is the effect. So really hone in on that.
And lastly, we want to think about a range of authorial choices. We want to really stretch ourselves to have that range of choices in our paper 2 response. So what we decided to do is for us to look at a couple of body paragraphs and specifically look at the body paragraphs in relation to these criterion B1. First, we're going to take a look at the question that the student answered.
Yeah, the question is a past paper question, and it reads as follows. How do the writers of two works you have studied represent gender and to what effect?
Okay, we love this question. It's from a past paper and it's dealing with that representation of gender, and we think that's a good one. This particular student chose to write about a doll's house and a streetcar named Desire. We thought those were good choices to demonstrate because they're widely taught. The first two body paragraphs, and the comparative point is that presentation of gender norms and expectations at the beginning of these two works. In A Doll's House, we see Nora's being belittled and dismissed by her husband, Torvald. Again, that establishes gender roles. And at the beginning of Streetcar, Blanche is clinging to the idea of illusions and the idea of purity and innocence in scene number 1.
The second pair of body paragraphs for this paper 2 response are going to look at unhealthy means of coping with respect to gender norms. And in this case, will be in Act 2 of A Doll's House, where Nora is considering self-harm. And then for A Streetcar Named Desire, we're going to think about Scene 5, when Blanche is using her sexuality and she's being flirtatious with a young man.
Okay, our last two body paragraphs are the ones that we're going to look at. These are the final moments of the works. At the end of the works, we see Nora confronting her husband Torvald and rejecting the gender norms and leaving the house at the end of that play. At the end of Streetcar Named Desire, Blanche completely descends into madness and talks about her, depending on the kindness of strangers, maybe clinging to those gender norms even until the end and the end of that play. Let's first look at the first body paragraph, which predominantly is looking at A Doll's House, and talk about criterion B1.
That's right. Remember, B1, we want to look at these yellow words. We are looking at precise authorial choices and thinking about their effects. So the first thing I notice is that the writer comes out and they're looking at costume and costume change. That's great because we're working with drama, so the student's showing good genre awareness, and they're focusing on Nora taking off her fancy dress.
Yeah, the next part of the paragraph talks about the dialogue and the tone that she uses when it says, "You don't understand me." Notice we have the idea of a harsh tone, but also the irony of that situation, as well as the idea of dialogue. So we're talking about a range of features in relation to that textual reference.
Next, we get into that reference about the doll wife, just as I was Papa's doll child, and the student links this to metaphor. Again, criterion B1, we need to link to those precise authorial choices, and the metaphor is noted. They also link that to Nora's epiphany, which is another great word to use for literary analysis. So again, that would score well for B1.
Yeah, that's right. And I noticed throughout this paragraph, they're not just mentioning the features, they're really thinking deeply about how that connects to meaning, how that shapes meaning about gender norms. And that talks about obligation and loyalty in particular. So now let's talk about the second body paragraph and look at A Streetcar Named Desire, where we're going to see, again, that attention to B1 and authorial choices.
Once again, we see the student beginning with costume and costume elements, linking that to the protagonist. This is good because it helps offer the comparative aspect of the paper, which actually is not B1, but that's a really important thing to do.
Yeah, that's right. We're noticing things like the use of sound, the use of the Barsuviana, and how that sound is used to symbolize her descent into madness. So that's mentioning the sound, connecting to the idea of how that shapes meaning.
Lastly, we have that very famous line, I have always depended on the kindness of strangers, and it looks like the student pins this to the authorial choice of dialogue and pathos, again showing that they understand authorial choices and they understand how these authorial choices shape meaning and create an effect for the audience.
So there you have Criterion B1, which is again at paying attention to literary features, authorial choices, and how they shape meaning. And there's analysis and evaluation in both cases. We think these are strong body paragraphs that show mastery of Criterion B1.
Yeah, make sure you come on back for the next video. We'll look at Criterion B2 and we'll look at that compare and contrast aspect. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.
Thanks, guys.